In August, we are turning to poetry as our inspiration. Christine Hides and I have been dreaming about Poetry Church for a while now, and so here we are turning a small dream into a reality and wondering why poetry seeks us out. Maybe it's like this. Iranian-American poet Sholeh Wolpe says, "The universe is one long poem. Some of us just tap into that poem and snatch little pieces of it and translate it into words." And that is in part what we do as a spiritual community, to translate into words this Spirit of God who is beyond words and yet we see glimmers of in this world. Last week, poetry led us to invocation, Insha'Allah, God willing. And this week, poetry leads us to a shared ethic, a kind of spiritual noticing and the possibility of kindness, a turning toward Jesus' unshielded but persuasive love in action. And it starts with a familiar text from the Sermon on the Mount, here in the translation called The Message by Eugene Peterson, a piece of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Here's another old saying, Jesus says, another old saying that deserves a second look. Eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Is that going to get us anywhere? Here's what I propose. Don't hit back at all. If someone strikes you, stand there and take it. If someone drags you into court and sues you for the shirt off your back, gift wrap your best coat and make it a present. And if someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit-for-tat stuff. Live generously. Please pray with me. Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be holy and acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. There's something of this shared spiritual ethic, this way of being in the world that continues on with the poem by Dausha Laméris called Small Kindness. You can follow along in the front of your bulletin. Here she is reading it now.
Small kindnesses. I've been thinking about the way, when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you by. Or how strangers still say, "Bless you," when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we are saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly, we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee hot and to say thank you to the person handing it, to smile at them, and for them to smile back. For the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder, and for the driver in the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire. Only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy? These fleeting temples we make together when we say, "Here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat."
This poem worked on me all week long. I listened for strangers saying to each other, "Bless you." Who among us does not need this kind of extra blessing from a lesser-known passerby? Don't die, we say to one another. May the blessing of life be upon you. And all week long, I watched the traffic. Who would give themselves over to letting the other car go ahead first in this world otherwise ruled by self-interest and assertive entitlement, or at best, a speedy, disinterested disregard? And what about that moment at the library when I filled my arms with so many books that they fell to the ground like lemons in the grocery store, spilling across the aisle, and a man 30 years my elder stooped to help, and stooped again when I dropped 2 more? Jesus says, remember, the world is arranged for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but it doesn't have to be that way. Try another way. Try it like this. Jesus says, try it turning the other cheek. Try it walking the second mile. Try it. We don't have to escalate. We don't have to let violence and indignity spiral and surge. Try it another way. Or, as Dausha Laméris says, we have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire, only these brief moments of exchange. So let's try it, at the very least, to say thank you to one another, to bless one another. Let us try it, at the very least, to help one another in the small moments where lemons spill across the grocery store parking lot, or when traffic piles up and the idea of merging seems beyond impossible. This summer, when I was on my way to visit my parents in Indianapolis, my mom warned that there was a traffic jam on my route because of a road rage-induced gun violence incident. A 17-year-old girl was driving on I-465 when someone reportedly cut her off. The girl said she honked at the driver, who responded with a barrage of gunfire. Bullets pierced her windshield, ripping through the driver's seat. She was fortunate and walked away unharmed, but it could have been otherwise. In 2023, there were 56 similar incidents of gunfire on Indianapolis interstates. Dausha Laméris notices small kindnesses in a world where microaggressions can accelerate to previously unimaginable realms of violence. And Jesus asks us to think about a world beyond an eye for an eye, in a world for him where microaggressions too accelerate to previously unimaginable realms of violence. Even that ancient phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, was there to subdue our own irrational ability to accelerate violence. It was there so that someone might, when an eye was lost or a tooth was lost, would refrain from burning down the entire village. And so these fences that Jesus and the ancient scribes ask us to place around ourselves are there, and they are here, as Dausha Laméris reminds us. She notices these small kindnesses, and it is necessary to notice because it is possible for the story to be otherwise. Jesus says, "You have heard it said, 'Thou shalt love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say unto you, love your enemies." Jesus knew that the world that we live in can escalate violence in a heartbeat, and the small kindnesses defray and settle the space between us, offering breathing room. Poet Mary Oliver makes a similar observation, but in reverse. She says, "We are not wise and not very often kind." She knows that sometimes, and more often than we would like, retaliation will backfire, violence will escalate, tensions will rise, and hostilities will flare up. We are not wise and not very often kind. And thus she continues, still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back, that sometimes something happens better than all the riches or power in the world. It could be anything, but very likely you notice it in an instant when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb. Joy is not made to be a crumb. Mary Oliver herself had a bad childhood. She calls it a very bad childhood. She calls it one of many thousands of childhoods that have been insufficient. But she says, she spent a lot of time walking around the woods in Ohio. I think it saved my life, she said. It was a very bad childhood, and I barely escaped it, she says, with years of trouble. But I did find the entire world in looking for something, and I got saved by poetry. I got saved by the beauty of the world. Someone here, too, has had an insufficient childhood, maybe at some point eventually, like Mary Oliver, getting saved by the beauty of the world, by walking around in the woods. But it isn't just that. Sometimes it is insufficient in that it is a meager or incomplete romance, an underwhelming career, an unfulfilled goal, some part of life inadequate and lacking, some threadbare grief, or long season of impossible losses and years of trouble. But in looking, somehow the entire world in all its beauty can still be found, love unearthed, grace revealed, possibility stumbled upon. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, Mary Oliver says, don't hesitate, give into it. Joy is not made to be a crumb. One little poetry story, and then I'll quit. This is all to honor the last day of the Olympics, the Paris Olympics. Did you hear that there used to be a gold medal for literature during the Olympics? That you could win the gold for poetry? If you thought live pigeon shooting or pistol dueling were odd Olympic sports, or if, like me, you think the International Olympic Committee should bring back tug of war, then maybe you would also advocate for the Olympic Committee to bring back the Olympic arts like poetry, sculpture, architecture, music, and painting. Discontinued in 1948, these categories were originally trying to mirror the original ancient Olympic Games. And despite being discontinued, an echo of poetry can still be found amid today's Olympic events. You just can't win the gold for it. For example, in 2008, Maya Angelou wrote a poem for the opening ceremony. And in 2021, after Simone Biles was criticized for dropping out of the race, Amanda Gorman wrote a poem for Biles. She says in her poem about Simone Biles, "She never settles for less than the rebel she is. That is what it means to be Biles bold. A beauty to behold at just 24 years old. She is such a treasure. Her work measures more than gold. This is the thunder, the thrill behind her throne. That power is from listening to a voice that is your own." And in 2012, something even more odd happened. A poetry bomb was let loose over the Olympic Village, or so it was called. A group of more than 300 poets from 204 countries gathered in London to honor the work of the Olympians who gathered despite great odds to represent their countries. The poets gathered up 300 poems, each from their own country, and printed them on little bookmarks, and set about making 100,000 copies of these poems, and then they put these poems in a helicopter and set them free over the Olympic stadiums. So at 9 p.m. on schedule, on Tuesday, June 26, 2012, 100,000 poems fluttered down from the sky. People jumped and chased poems across the park. They lunged toward poems that came within reach. Some were quite competitive about snagging descending poems. Victoriously catching a poem from the air became its own Olympic sport. One poet even noticed a poem fluttering down into her lap the next day, falling from some tree or building where it had gotten stuck the day before. No gold medals were awarded, just poetry raining down across the Olympic Village. Used for her 2008 opening ceremonies, this is what Maya Angelou writes, and she herself echoes some spirit of Dausha Laméris' small kindnesses and our hope for a better world. She says, Our beautiful children arrive at this universal stadium. They have bathed in the waters of the world and carry the soft silt of the Amazon, the Nile, the Danube, the Rhine, the Yangtze, and the Mississippi in the palm of their right hands. We are here roaring and singing. We prove that we can not only make peace, we can bring it with us. With respect for the world and its people, we compete passionately without hatred. With respect for the world and its people, we can take pride in the achievement of strangers. With respect for the world and its people, we can share openly the success of friends. Here then is the amazement. Against the odds of impending war, in the mouth of bloody greed, human grace and human spirit can still conquer. We discover ourselves are the amazement which awaits. We are ourselves amazement. Maya Angelou's poem speaks across the broad goals of the Olympics to see and remember that against all odds, despite the always present possibility of impending war, and in the face of every human inadequacy, there is a possibility for grace to prevail, that it is possible for a still yet unrealized better way. And for us, in this house, that is the way of Jesus, who calls us to a peace beyond us, a peace beyond human understanding. And so we hear again these words of Dausha Laméris, words that remind us that possibilities arise, the human spirit prevails, and small kindnesses thread us together with love.
Small kindnesses. I've been thinking about the way, when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you by. Or how strangers still say, "Bless you," when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we are saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly, we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee hot and to say thank you to the person handing it, to smile at them, and for them to smile back. For the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder, and for the driver in the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire. Only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy? These fleeting temples we make together when we say, "Here, have my seat. Go ahead. You first. I like your hat."